the speeches of John Kennedy. And the review says, in quotes, "This is not a cozy evening of homey memories. Kennedy's style is on the stage, and you are generally alone with the man and his public utterances, starting with his presidential press conferences, where the reporters ask him questions. And there's a background of unstereotyped pictures that go on a screen, and you wonder where on earth did they get them, and a contemporary soundtrack and a clock ticking away that is very effective. There are no references to his wife or family, but the evening clips off with the final pistol shot. It's done very tastefully. The play is called JFK. The review says it is not a drama, nor is it a show, but to see and hear it with tightening throat is to face what we had and what we lost, and perhaps what we all were." Now, in the newspaper Sunday was an article called "An Expert's Warning, Beware of the Experts." It's by a man who worked in the Pentagon, in the CIA, in the State Department, in research analysis corporations. He worked on arms control. He was a director of the arms control and disarmament study. He worked at Caltech, the University of California, for years for our government. His name is Sidney Slomak, and this is what he tells you. "Take your society, your laws' integrity, and your country back from the experts. I have been an expert, and I tell you the experts have gone wild, and they have gone like cancer. And nothing is more expert than cancer, and nothing is a better example of power without purpose, and cancerous as ignorant, but it works and it grows. I have left all of the government experts behind," he said, and he wants something that is real. He has worked with the social scientists, and he's watched what they have done to our society. He said one of the leading social scientists has said that the chief accomplishment of this age is to change so many political problems into technical ones. We see of Vietnam as Auschwitz, the result of technical solutions to political problems. "I spent a number of years as an officer in the CIA," he said, and he gives his background in the various jobs. "For 16 years, I worked exclusively within the established foreign policy and the government. And only in the late 60s, did I come to understand that the government and the business and what is correctly called the establishment were inert, and they were committed to the shape of things as they have been to inaugurate human policies that for change the people must take the government back to themselves. Only when people are awakened from the grasping power from these mindless mega institutions are you going to effect changes." Now, he goes into the fact that for 15 years at home and abroad, the United States government is not concerned with human life or its purposes, but only with ignorance, power, and control, and with death. He said this government is the greatest polluter on the earth, is an agent of potentially total repression, and it is the greatest threat to continued human life the world has ever faced. "I do not say these things lightly," he said. "The entire system of expertise and secrecy," and he means the secrecy in our government, "is designed to prevent people of this country from determining their own destinies, and it's basically fake. Over the last 20 years, I've had continuous top-secret clearances from the United States Army, State Department, CIA, Defense. I never learned one thing of value in this secret system. Everything valuable I have learned was known and perceived and written from an open and scholarly unclassified source or from newspapers, journals, or my own observations. There is no silent majority. Man is a speaking animal. There is only a silenced majority, repressed, clamped down, frightened majority, and that is you. And you are frightened and you have been silenced." And he said, "Look in your war rooms at the walnut massive files, contracts for millions of dollars worth of death and death research, fancy desks and chairs, paraphernalia of power, and they are all yours, and they belong to you. Take them back and make human use of them, and make this your society as it is your life. Everything you do, everything you can do to please yourself and build your life is more beautiful and more real than the fakery, abstraction, obsession, and desire for death that rules this country today. That's the only secret worth knowing. Once you know it, you can take back this nation with difficulty and end the American nightmare, make it the American dream." End quotes. Now, the reason I read the article is to get back to the fact that the information on the death of John Kennedy that would prove who killed that man 8 years ago is locked up in the National Archives under the designation of National Security Top Secret. If Oswald did it alone, we could all examine the evidence. If there was a conspiracy, it's gone 8 years. We are on a road of death. Everybody working inside the department is going to speak up who has a moral fiber in him. Mr. Slomik is writing a book. People are going to have to talk about this system. The book is called The American Nightmare. Computer and Automation, I'll go back to that again, every month has an article on the coup d'etat that overthrew the country. I can't emphasize this enough, and I want to say one more time that anybody who does not believe me and wants to get together and examine a little bit of the documentary evidence, I will share it with you. I'm not here to scare you. And you've been in my home, Gloria. You've seen the amount of research.
Oh, yes. Right.
We're not here to scare people.
No, just to wake them up.
Yeah, I mean, what is this all about? You know, somebody listened to the show and said, well, she's making a lot of rumors about the Kennedys and Marilyn Monroe. What kind of research does she have? Or she's talking about drug problems. And if she talks about drugs, she can't be knowledgeable about...
They'll pick up on one thing and possibly with the intention of discrediting you. And then the stock phrase is, if she's wrong on this point, then I question the rest of her points. And then you have to go back and say, you know, everything that she says is documented. I had a talk just yesterday with a young man who's also a teacher, and these same points come up, and it's almost like I could make a recording when I meet people and they ask me what I do at the station, and then I'm hesitant to say that I do the dialogue assassination because many people just, forget it. You know, they don't want to hear about it.
Their real fear. Yeah.
And I said, well, you really should know about it because the time is very short. And usually that makes their ears perk up. But then I have to go through the whole thing again, you know, about your 8 years of research and document you when I shouldn't have to.
You're the same people that will take one sentence that I say on an entire program and say, well, if this is what she said, then nothing else is accurate. Those same people, if I met them 6 years ago and told them that our government financed a war in Laos that's been going on 6 years, or that there was a systematic plan, say, to kill off all the Panthers, or if I were to say that our CIA killed DM for a particular reason, they would judge me totally insane. Then I was saying things about the funding of money and foundations and the connections of foreign policy to the State Department or the CIA that people would say, well, that's not true. And if I quote an article by Evelyn Knight, you know, who came out last year, she's the head of the whole State Department, and she's a very right-winger, if you can put in that classification. Her husband's a millionaire. She's very much establishment, and she works hand in glove with J. Edgar Hoover. She's in charge of the Passport Department. She had an article in Time magazine, which is an establishment magazine, saying the State Department is riddled with deaths and political assassinations and stinks to high heaven. So her quotation was that effect. If I say it, people say, well, where do you get the documents? I'm sure that Evelyn Knight has documents of these political assassinations. She doesn't just take it out of thin air. But if you don't want to believe it's happening, you don't have to believe it. I was speaking to a teacher at MPC on the telephone this week, and somebody didn't think that we could get along or that he didn't like what I said out there because of his political stand. And I said, look, whatever you think politically, I probably agree with you more than I do the people you think I'm lined up with. Because Richard Russell, a member of the Warren Commission, had a news conference in 1970, January, where he said, I never believed Oswald did it alone. And I brought in a book, just we briefly have time. It's written by Jesse Curry, chief of police in Dallas, and he wrote a book about 2 years ago. And it's called The Retired Dallas Police Chief Jesse Curry Reveals His Personal JFK File. Now, everyone accuses the Dallas police of a conspiracy, and I say not all members were involved. Well, on page 81, Jesse Curry goes into the story of the assassination, and he says the assassination evidence, how does the puzzle fit? And this is what he says in quotes. Within 12 hours after the assassination of John Kennedy, investigators were overwhelmed by the vast amount of evidence that linked Oswald to the president's death. And in the years that followed, many theories and counter-theories were presented. The evidence gathered during the assassination weekend was dispersed in many directions. The FBI had already begun to seize evidence at the scene. Secret Service agents seized the president's body before the required autopsy was performed. Although most of the evidence gathered by the police department did not remain in our hands very long, early Friday evening, November 22nd, FBI agents were anxious to have all the physical evidence of the murder released to them. Dallas police officials couldn't go into it. He said, much of what was released to the FBI, I took careful note of the evidence and kept a detailed personal file. Some of the evidence has been completely misrepresented in stories told about the assassination, and bits of seemingly important evidence have remained almost completely ignored. Theoretical reconstructions of what might have happened should not be allowed to dominate the actual eyewitness accounts and evidence. Many questions remain as to how the evidence fits together. Every man must decide for himself and act as his own jury. Now, that's Jesse Curry of the Dallas Police, who feels that these things should be available. Now, in his book, on page 85, he has a picture of Oswald's weapon, and he tells you that the fingerprints were such poor quality they weren't able to identify any of Oswald's fingerprints on it. On page 87 of his book, he says a paraffin test was taken of Oswald's face that did not reveal nitrates from having fired a rifle, thus offering no proof that Oswald had fired a rifle. On page 87, the chief of police of Dallas said that there were retouched versions of pictures of Oswald with the weapon used in magazines and newspapers. Why were they retouched? On page 89 of his book, he goes into a list of pieces of evidence that were picked up by the FBI for tests, and he shows that none of them really fit the case, that a paper bag was picked up from the book depository that he was supposed to have brought the gun in, and then he shows that there was no evidence that Oswald had the gun in there. There were no fibers from the blanket. He says no fibers were found associated with the blanket from his shirt on the paper bag or on the shirt. And he goes into the evidence of Oswald's fingerprints that weren't on the gun, the nitrate test that wasn't there, and a lot of discrepancies that later were to come out. He said no latent fingerprints of any value were on Oswald's revolver. That's the one that was shot, Officer Tippett. Now, this is what I keep trying to say on the shows, Gloria, that I'm not talking about Bircher's bullets or communist bullets or Republican or Democrat or peace and freedom. These are not political issues. This is the chief of police of Dallas who's written a book telling you that the nitrate test showed he didn't shoot anybody. There were no fingerprints on his revolver, none on the rifle, that the pictures of him were doctored, and how much more do people need than the actual facts of a thing to get involved into what really happened? It's just shocking to me to accumulate this amount of material and have people walk up to you and say, well, if you think there's drugs on campus, then your research isn't accurate. We can handle that, but I feel sorry for these people because the documents are here, and if they will listen every week as we roll on with more facts and evidence and keep their minds open, I think they'll gain a lot by not being afraid to listen. And I thank you for the opportunity to share it with them.
Oh, we thank you.
You have the courage.
You've been listening to Dialogue. Dialogue is a presentation of the Public Affairs and Special Events Department of KLRB News.